The weight of my father's funeral ring hung heavy on my right hand as I watched the last of the mourners file out of our family mansion. My name is Cynthia, and at 28, I never expected to be standing here, surrounded by empty champagne glasses and hollow condolences. Darling, you should really freshen up. Your mascara's running. Lexi's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife wrapped in silk. My stepmother stood in her perfectly tailored black dress, not a hair out of place despite the long day of performing grief. I'm fine, I replied, turning away from her practiced concern. The mansion felt different now, colder, emptier without Dad's booming laugh echoing through its halls. As you wish. She placed her hand on my shoulder, her diamond rings catching the light. We need to discuss the estate arrangements tomorrow. There are some financial matters that require immediate attention. Before I could respond, Mauricio, our butler of 20 years, appeared at my elbow. Miss Cynthia, might I have a word? In private. Lexi's perfectly manicured nails dug slightly into my shoulder before she released me. Of course, I'll be in the study if anyone needs me. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she retreated. Mauricio led me to the kitchen, his familiar presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. He glanced around before reaching into his jacket pocket. Your father asked me to give you this after the funeral. He handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. He was very specific about the timing. My hands trembled as I took it. When did he give this to you? 3 months ago, just before his diagnosis. Mauricio's eyes held something I couldn't quite read. He made me promise to ensure it reached you directly. I broke the seal, unfolding the letter with shaking fingers. Dad's distinctive handwriting filled the page. My dearest Cynthia, if you're reading this, I've failed to tell you the truth in person, and for that, I'm sorry. The mansion, our home, belongs to you. It always has, through a trust your mother established before she passed. Lexi doesn't know. The official will reading tomorrow will reveal everything, but I needed you to know first. Be careful, sweetheart. Watch the shadows. Love, Dad. Mauricio, did you know about this? I looked up, but his expression remained carefully neutral. I know many things, Miss Cynthia, including that Mrs. Bryant has been making calls to real estate agents this past week. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, hollow and bitter. She's trying to sell my house. Your stepmother has always been ambitious. Mauricio's voice dropped lower. But there's more you should know. The safe in your father's study. Cynthia! Francesca's voice rang out from the hallway. Where are you hiding? Mauricio stepped back smoothly as my best friend burst into the kitchen, her dark curls wild and her eyes concerned. I've been looking everywhere for you. Are you okay? I'm fine, I said automatically, then caught myself. Actually, no, I'm not fine at all. I glanced at Mauricio, who nodded almost imperceptibly before disappearing through the service door. Francesca grabbed my hands. Talk to me. What's going on? Dad left me a letter. I squeezed her fingers. The mansion is mine, Fran. All of it. And Lexi's been trying to sell it behind my back. That snake! Francesca's eyes widened. No wonder she's been hovering around that sleazy lawyer all day. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, we heard voices from the study, Lexi and a man whose tone I recognized instantly. Dan Parker, the family lawyer who'd once asked me out and never quite gotten over my rejection. The will reading is tomorrow, I whispered, tucking Dad's letter into my dress pocket. Let them plot. Tomorrow they'll learn that the house they're trying to sell isn't theirs to sell. Francesca squeezed my arm. Want me to stay tonight? I shook my head, straightening my shoulders. No, I need to face this alone. But first, I glanced toward the study. I think it's time to see what's in Dad's safe. Cynthia, Francesca warned, be careful. Oh, I will be. I smoothed down my black dress, Dad's ring catching the light. After all, I'm not the one who should be worried about losing everything. As I headed toward the study, my heels echoing against the floor my mother had chosen 30 years ago, I felt something shift inside me. Grief was still there, raw and real, but now it had company. Determination, anger, and a fierce desire to protect what was mine. Let Lexi play her games. Tomorrow she'd learn exactly whose house she was living in. Your father always said this place had more secrets than a confessional, Francesca whispered as we crept into Dad's study after midnight. The leather-bound books and heavy curtains cast strange shadows in the dim light of our phones. Help me move this painting. I reached for the massive landscape that had hung behind Dad's desk for as long as I could remember. My hands trembled slightly as we lifted it, revealing the wall safe I'd only glimpsed a handful of times throughout my life. Do you know the combination? Francesca asked. I smiled, remembering Dad's cryptic words years ago. My birthday, Mom's birthday, and the day they met. My fingers spun the dial with practiced precision, and the safe clicked open with a satisfying thunk. Inside, stacks of folders and documents filled the space. But what caught my eye was a USB drive labeled Insurance and a thick manila envelope with my name on it. Look at this. I pulled out a stack of photos. They showed Lexi at various cafes and restaurants, meeting with different men. The dates stamped on the backs went back 5 years, while Dad was still alive. Francesca peered over my shoulder. Is that Dan, your father's lawyer? And that's James from the investment firm. My stomach churned. Dad knew. He knew she was playing him. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. We froze. Quick, the safe! Francesca hissed. We scrambled to replace everything except the USB and the envelope with my name, closing the safe and barely managing to rehang the painting before the study door opened. Mauricio, I nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of our butler. Miss Cynthia, Mrs. Bryant is awake. She's asking for you. His eyes darted to the painting, then back to me. She's in the kitchen. At this hour? Francesca frowned. I'll handle it, I said, tucking the USB and envelope into my pocket. Fran, can you... I'll wait here, she nodded. Text if you need backup. The kitchen lights were harsh after the darkness of the study. Lexi sat at the island counter, wrapped in an expensive silk robe, nursing what looked like scotch. Couldn't sleep? She asked, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes sharp. I was just getting some water. I moved to the sink, keeping my back to her. We need to talk about tomorrow, darling. Ice clinked in her glass. Your father left some substantial debts, the mansion's upkeep alone. Really? I turned, leaning against the counter. That's interesting, considering Dad's last financial statement showed the estate was completely solvent. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows rose slightly. You've been going through his papers? Let's cut the act, Lexi. I pulled out my phone, pulling up the photos I'd just discovered. Care to explain these? The color drained from her face as she swiped through them. Where did you get these? Dad wasn't as oblivious as you thought. He knew about your meetings with Dan, with James, with all of them. My voice remained steady despite my racing heart. What were you planning? To sell the mansion as soon as the will was read? You don't understand anything. She stood, her robe swishing dramatically. Your father was sick long before his diagnosis. He was making terrible decisions, risking everything Everything you wanted, you mean? I stepped closer. Did you really think you'd get away with it? Her laugh was sharp and bitter. Get away with what? Being a concerned wife? Trying to protect our family's interests? You're just a child playing at being grown up. A child who owns this house. I watched the words hit her like a physical blow. That's right. Mom left it to me in a trust. Dad told me everything. You're lying. But her hand shook as she set down her glass. The will reading tomorrow will prove it. Every property document, every deed. They're all in my name. I moved toward the door. Sleep well, Lexi. You might want to start packing in the morning. You ungrateful little... She caught herself, forcing a smile. We can work something out, surely. We're family, after all. Family doesn't try to sell each other's homes behind their backs. I paused at the doorway. And family doesn't betray the people they claim to love. Back in the study, Francesca was pacing. Well, she knows. I pulled out the USB drive. But she doesn't know everything, not yet. I plugged it into Dad's computer, and folders of financial records, emails, and surveillance photos filled the screen. "Your father was thorough," Francesca whispered. "He was protecting me." I clicked through the files, each one revealing more of Lexi's schemes. And tomorrow, I'm going to use everything he left me to take back what's mine. "What do you need me to do?" I smiled, thinking of the look on Lexi's face when she realized she'd lost control. "Call Raphael. We're going to need all the family support we can get for what comes next." The morning sun streamed through the mansion's windows as Raphael strode into the breakfast room, his presence immediately filling the space. My cousin had always been the family's voice of reason, and right now, I needed that more than ever. "Little Sin," he said, wrapping me in a tight hug. "I came as soon as I got Francesca's call. Show me everything." I spread the documents across the antique dining table. Bank statements, emails, surveillance photos. Raphael's expression darkened as he examined each piece of evidence. "That conniving—" He stopped mid-sentence as heels clicked on marble. Lexi appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Raphael, what a lovely surprise." She moved to hug him, but he stepped back, positioning himself beside me. Her smile faltered for just a moment. "Lexi," he nodded coldly, "I hear you've been busy making plans for the estate. Someone has to think about practical matters." She perched on a chair across from us. "Cynthia, darling, about our conversation last night. I've spoken with Dan, and he agrees we should discuss the outstanding debts immediately." "What debts?" Raphael's voice was sharp. "The mortgage refinancing, the renovation loans." Lexi waved her hand dismissively. "Your uncle made some unfortunate financial decisions in his final months." I pulled out my father's last bank statement. "You mean these loans? The ones you took out in Dad's name while he was on heavy medication?" The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you're implying. Stop lying." I slapped down copies of loan documents bearing signatures that clearly didn't match my father's usual handwriting. "Did you really think Dad wouldn't notice? That he wouldn't protect himself, and me? Everything I did was for this family." Lexi's composure cracked. "Your father was losing his grip, making terrible investments. Someone had to step in. By forging his signature? By meeting secretly with his lawyer to plan the sale of my house?" I leaned forward. "Yes, my house. Mom's trust made sure of that." The door opened again, and Dan walked in, his expensive suit failing to hide his discomfort when he saw Raphael. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, hovering uncertainly. "Perfect timing," Raphael said, standing. "Care to explain why you've been helping Lexi arrange the sale of property she doesn't own?" I don't know what you're talking about." Dan's eyes darted to Lexi. "Mrs. Bryant asked for standard estate planning advice." "Save it." I pulled out my phone, playing a recording from one of their cafe meetings. Their voices filled the room, discussing property values and potential buyers. "You recorded us?" Lexi's voice shook with rage. "Dad did." I stopped the playback. "He knew everything, Lexi. Every meeting, every forged document, every betrayal. This is ridiculous." Dan straightened his tie. "These recordings won't hold up in court, but the forensic accounting report will." Raphael produced another folder. "Along with the testimony from Dad's doctors about his mental state when these loans were taken out. Want to guess how that looks for both of you?" Lexi stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I've done for you." "Done for me?" I laughed. "You mean trying to steal my inheritance? Plotting to sell my home? Using my father's illness to line your own pockets?" "You have no idea what it takes to maintain all this." She gestured wildly at our surroundings. "Your precious mother's trust? It's barely enough to keep the lights on. Someone had to think about the future." "Your future, you mean?" I stood slowly. "Well, think about this. You have 24 hours to pack your things and leave. After that, I'm calling the police." "You can't do this to me." Her voice wavered between threat and plea. "Actually, she can." Raphael placed a hand on my shoulder. "The will reading this afternoon will make everything official. But make no mistake, you've lost, Lexi. The only question is how much dignity you'll have left when you walk out that door. Dan cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss. I met his gaze steadily. You might want to contact the Bar Association yourself before I do. I hear they take a dim view of lawyers who help forge documents. He paled, backing toward the door. Lexi watched him go, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. 24 hours, I repeated. And Lexi, don't bother trying to take anything that isn't yours. Mauricio has a complete inventory of every item in this house. She opened her mouth to respond, but Raphael cut her off. I'd quit while you're ahead. You really don't want us looking any closer at those offshore accounts, do you? The mention of the accounts, something I hadn't even known about, made her flinch. Without another word, she turned and fled the room. Think she'll go quietly? I asked Raphael. He squeezed my shoulder. Not a chance. But don't worry, we're ready for whatever she tries next. Looking at the evidence spread across the table, I realized this was just the beginning. The real battle was still to come. The family gathered in the grand parlor for the will reading, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I sat between Raphael and Francesca, watching Lexi hold court on the opposite side of the room with Dan hovering nearby. She'd changed into a demure black dress, playing the grieving widow to perfection. Before we begin, the senior partner from Dad's law firm announced, I should note that Edward made some unusual requests regarding this reading. Lexi's perfectly painted smile flickered. Unusual how? He requested a video be played first. The lawyer nodded to his assistant, who set up a laptop and projector. My father's face filled the wall, healthy and strong as he'd been 6 months ago. The room fell silent. If you're watching this, Dad began, I'm no longer here to defend my choices, but I can explain them. He shifted in his chair. Lexi, my dear, you're probably wondering why I let you believe you'd inherit everything. The truth is, I needed to see how far you'd go. The color drained from her face as Dad continued. The surveillance photos, the recorded meetings, the forged documents. I know about all of it. Every scheme, every betrayal, every attempt to steal what rightfully belongs to my daughter. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Cynthia, Dad's voice softened. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything while I could, but I needed proof. Proof that's now in the hands of my lawyers, the police, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Lexi shot to her feet. This is absurd. He was sick, delusional. Sit down, Raphael commanded. You'll want to hear the rest. On screen, Dad held up a familiar USB drive. Everything's here. The offshore accounts, the embezzlement from my company, the conspiracy with Dan Parker to falsify legal documents. Dan stumbled backward, his face ashen. I didn't. Save it, Francesca snapped. We have the recordings. My estate, Dad continued, including the mansion, was never mine to give away. It belongs to Cynthia through her mother's trust. A fact you discovered, Lexi, leading to your desperate attempts to sell it before this day. The video paused, and the lawyer stood. There's more, but first, I'm legally obligated to inform everyone that the FBI is currently executing search warrants at multiple locations, including Mr. Parker's office and Mrs. Bryant's private residence. You can't do this to me. Lexi's composure shattered completely. I made this family what it is. I kept everything running while he was dying. You mean while you were stealing from him? I stood, my voice steady. While you were forging his signature and plotting to sell my home. You ungrateful little, she lunged forward, but Raphael caught her arm. Don't make this worse for yourself, he warned. The lawyer cleared his throat. Shall we continue with the video? Dad's face reappeared, his eyes sad but determined. Lexi, I loved you once. I believed in you, but you chose greed over family, ambition over loyalty. The evidence has already been submitted to the authorities. By the time this video plays, your accounts will be frozen. No, she whispered, sinking into her chair. No, no, no. As for you, Dan. Dad's gaze seemed to fix directly on the trembling lawyer. I trusted you with my family's legal affairs. That trust was misplaced. The Bar Association has received a complete file of your activities. Dan bolted from the room, nearly knocking over the assistant. The rest of the will is straightforward, Dad concluded. Cynthia inherits everything, as her mother intended. The trust she's held since birth remains intact. And Lexi... He paused. You have 24 hours to leave the premises before trespassing charges are filed. The video ended. Silence filled the room until Lexi's laugh, high and brittle, shattered it. You think this is over? She turned to me, mascara smearing beneath her eyes. You have no idea how to run this estate, how to manage this kind of wealth. You'll fail, just like your mother would have. Don't you dare speak about my mother. I stepped closer, my voice low. You're not half the woman she was. She built this family's legacy. You tried to steal it. Security will escort Mrs. Bryant to collect her personal belongings, the lawyer announced. The FBI agents outside will want to speak with her afterward. As two men in suits appeared in the doorway, Lexi's facade crumbled completely. This isn't fair. You deserve prison, Raphael cut in. Be grateful if you only lose your money and your reputation. I watched as they led her away, her threats and protests fading down the hallway. Francesca squeezed my hand. You okay? No, I admitted, looking around the room where my family's drama had just imploded. But I will be. Dad made sure of that. The lawyer approached with a stack of documents. Miss Cynthia, there are some papers to sign. And... He lowered his voice. There's one more video. Private, for your eyes only. I nodded, feeling the weight of my father's final messages, his protection, his love. The battle wasn't over, but at least now I knew exactly what I was fighting for. The doorbell rang at midnight, 3 days after the will reading. I'd been curled up in Dad's study, reviewing financial documents, when Mauricio appeared in the doorway. Miss Cynthia, you have a visitor. His hesitation made me look up. It's your sister, Madeline. My half-sister. The one who'd cut ties with us years ago after a bitter fight with Dad. I hadn't seen her since. Send her in, I said, straightening my clothes. And Mauricio, stay close. Madeline swept into the room like a storm front, all designer clothes and sharp edges. She looked exactly like Lexi, her mother, but with Dad's eyes. Well, well, she said, dropping into a leather chair. Quite the show you put on with Mum the other day. Bravo. What do you want, Madeline? I remained behind Dad's desk, keeping the barrier between us. Can't a girl visit her sister? She examined her perfect manicure, especially when said sister just had their mutual stepmother arrested for fraud. Half-sister, I corrected, and Lexi wasn't arrested. She's under investigation. Same difference. Madeline leaned forward. Look, I know we're not close, but I have information you need to hear. About what? About Mum's plans. She's not done, you know. She's already meeting with lawyers in the city, planning her next move. I pulled out my phone, hitting record discreetly. And you know this how? Because she called me. A smile played at her lips. Wanted me to help her prove Dad was mentally incompetent when he made those videos. Offered me a cut of the estate if I testified. And I told her to go to hell. Madeline's smile vanished. Look, I may have left this family, but not because of Dad. I left because of her, because I saw what she was doing to him, to all of us. The study door opened again, and Raphael stepped in. I thought I heard your voice, Maddie. Raph. She stood to hug him. Still playing big brother to everyone? Someone has to. He perched on the desk corner. Why are you really here? To warn you. She pulled out her phone, showing us text messages. Mum's not just planning legal action. She's desperate, dangerous. She's been contacting everyone who might have dirt on the family, trying to build a case to contest the will. She can't contest what was never hers, I said. No, but she can drag this family's name through the mud trying. Madeline sighed. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I want to help. Why? I stood, moving around the desk. You haven't spoken to any of us in 3 years. Because I was wrong, okay? Her voice cracked slightly. I was young and stupid and angry, but watching Mom destroy this family, I can't stay silent anymore. Raphael and I exchanged looks. He gave a slight nod. What exactly do you know? I asked. Everything. Madeline pulled out a USB drive, similar to Dad's. Mom kept records of all her schemes. Insurance, she called it. I found them when I was cleaning out her condo last year. Why didn't you come forward then? Because Dad was still alive and I couldn't face him. She placed the drive on the desk. But he's gone now and you're in charge. You need to know what you're up against. I picked up the drive, turning it over in my hands. This could be a trap. It's not. She met my gaze steadily. Check the timestamps, the metadata. It's all authentic. And there's more. About Dan, about the offshore accounts, about her other victims. Other victims? Raphael straightened. Mum's done this before. 2 other marriages, 2 other families she nearly destroyed. She's not just a gold digger, she's a professional con artist. My hand shook as I plugged the drive into Dad's computer. Files populated the screen. Documents, photos, bank statements dating back 15 years. Jesus, Raphael muttered, scanning the contents. She's been doing this for decades. And now she's desperate, Madeline added. She's lost everything, her reputation, her money, her power. People like her don't just walk away from that. What do you suggest? I asked. Let me help. I know how she thinks, how she operates. And she hesitated. Maybe it's time to repair some bridges in this family. The room fell silent except for the hum of the computer. I studied my half-sister's face, looking for any sign of deception. Okay, I finally said, but if this is a game, it's not. She stood. I've spent 3 years regretting walking away from my family. I won't make that mistake again. Raphael cleared his throat. We should show this to the FBI. Tomorrow, I decided. Tonight, I think we need to hear everything Madeline knows, starting with what Lexi's planning next. As Madeline began to talk, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before an even bigger storm. But this time, at least, I wasn't facing it alone. She's here, Mauricio announced, his normally stoic expression tight with concern. Mrs. Bryant is at the front gate, demanding entry. I glanced at the security feed on my laptop. Lexi stood outside in a perfectly tailored suit, flanked by 2 men who screamed, "Lawyer," from their expensive shoes to their briefcases. Let her in, I said, straightening my father's ring on my finger. It's time to end this. Madeline touched my arm. Are you sure about this? Positive. I looked around the study where we'd gathered. Raphael, Francesca, Madeline, and our family lawyer. Everyone knows their part? They nodded as Lexi's heels clicked down the hallway, getting closer. The door burst open, and there she stood, somehow looking both immaculate and unhinged. Well, isn't this cozy? Her gaze swept the room, lingering on Madeline. My own daughter, conspiring with the enemy. How dramatic. Save it, Mom, Madeline said. We know everything. Do you? Lexi's laugh was brittle. You think your little USB drive tells the whole story. You have no idea what really happened in this family. I stood, moving to the front of Dad's desk. Then enlighten us. Your father was weak, she spat. He would have lost everything if I hadn't stepped in. Those investments I made, they saved this family's fortune. You mean the illegal transfers to offshore accounts? Raphael held up a stack of documents. The ones you made while he was on heavy medication. Everything I did was legal, one of her lawyers interjected. Mrs. Bryant had power of attorney. A forged power of attorney, our family lawyer corrected, sliding forward another document. The neurologist's report confirms Edward was fully competent when he revoked it 3 months before his death. Lexi's composure cracked slightly. This is ridiculous. I demand. You demand nothing. I pulled out an envelope. This is an official eviction notice. You have 1 hour to leave the premises, or the police will remove you. You ungrateful little bitch. She lunged forward, but Raphael stepped between us. I gave you everything. I raised you after your precious mother died. You mean after you convinced Dad to send me to boarding school? I kept my voice steady. After you systematically isolated him from everyone who could expose your schemes? You have no proof. Actually, Madeline interrupted, we do. She opened her laptop, playing a video of Lexi meeting with Dan in a hotel room, plotting their next move. Where did you get that? Lexi's face went white. From your own records, Mom. You really should change your passwords occasionally. The lawyers exchanged glances, one of them already backing toward the door. Mrs. Bryant, he said carefully, you didn't mention these complications when you retained us, because they're lies. She whirled on him. All of it, fabricated by an ungrateful child who owns this house? I cut in. Who has proof of your fraud, your conspiracies, and your previous cons? Yes, we know about the other families too. Her other lawyer cleared his throat. I believe we should continue this discussion after consulting with our ethics board. Cowards! Lexi screamed as they hurried out. You can't do this to me. I made this family. No, I stepped closer. You nearly destroyed it. But Dad saw through you. He protected me, protected everything, while you dug your own grave. I'll fight this, she hissed. I'll tell everyone what really goes on in this family. Every dirty secret, every scandal. Go ahead. Francesca spoke up from the corner. The press would love to hear about your history of marrying wealthy men and bleeding them dry. I'm sure your previous victims would be happy to comment. Lexi's gaze darted around the room, finding no allies. Madeline, she tried, voice softening. Sweetheart, you can't believe these lies about your own mother. Save it, Madeline stood. I've spent years ashamed of walking away from this family. Now I'm ashamed I didn't expose you sooner. Security is waiting, Mauricio announced from the doorway. Shall I escort Mrs. Bryant out? This isn't over, Lexi snarled, backing toward the door. You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming. Actually, I held up my phone. The FBI does. They're very interested in those offshore accounts, and the evidence of money laundering, and the forged documents. Her face crumpled for just a moment before the mask slipped back into place. You'll regret this, all of you. Goodbye, Lexi. I watched as security appeared to escort her out. Don't bother trying to contact us. Your lawyers can talk to ours. As her protests faded down the hallway, Madeline let out a shaky breath. That's not the end. No, I agreed, watching Lexi's retreating figure on the security feed. But it's the beginning of the end. Raphael squeezed my shoulder. We'll be ready for whatever she tries next. Looking around at my unlikely alliance, my half-sister, my cousin, my best friend, I finally felt the weight of Dad's words sink in. He hadn't just left me an inheritance. He'd left me a family, stronger than ever. The call came at 3 a.m., jolting me awake. Madeline's voice crackled through the phone, tense and urgent. Mom's making her move. She's filed an emergency injunction, claiming Dad was mentally incompetent. The hearing's in 2 hours. I bolted upright. 2 hours? That's not possible. The courts don't... She's got a judge in her pocket, Madeline cut in. Judge Harrison. They're old friends, apparently. I'm on my way. Raphael's voice joined the call. Already called our lawyers. Meet at the courthouse in an hour. I threw on clothes while dialing Francesca. Within 45 minutes, our entire team had assembled on the courthouse steps. Dawn was just breaking, casting long shadows across the empty plaza. Here they come, Francesca muttered. Lexi strode toward us, flanked by new lawyers and, my stomach dropped, Dan Parker. She'd traded her designer suits for a modest black dress, playing the grieving widow perfectly. Last chance, she called out. Drop this ridiculous vendetta, and we can work something out. Like you worked things out with your previous husbands? Madeline stepped forward. How many families have you destroyed, Mom? I'm trying to protect this family's legacy. Lexi's voice rose. Your father was sick, making irrational decisions. Is that what you told Judge Harrison? I interrupted. The same judge who vacationed with you in the Caymans last year. Her step faltered. How did you... We found the photos, Raphael said, holding up his phone. Along with the offshore account transfers. Interesting timing, right before he handled your divorce from husband number 2. The courthouse doors opened, and a clerk emerged. The judge will see you now. Inside the courtroom, tension crackled as both sides took their positions. Judge Harrison, a stern-faced man in his 60s, peered down at us. "Mrs. Bryant," he began, "you claim Edward was mentally incompetent when he made these videos and changed his will." "Yes, Your Honor." Lexi dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The medication affected his judgment. He became paranoid, making wild accusations. "Like these?" I nodded to our lawyer, who projected images onto the courtroom screen. Photos of Lexi meeting Judge Harrison, bank statements showing suspicious transfers. The judge's face darkened. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Your Honor," our lawyer stepped forward, "is that we have evidence of judicial misconduct, and we've already submitted it to the State Ethics Board." "This is outrageous." Lexi's lawyer jumped up. "These accusations are supported by extensive documentation," Madeline interrupted, walking forward with a thick folder, "including records of your private meetings with my mother to coordinate this emergency hearing." Judge Harrison's hands gripped his gavel tightly. "I will not be blackmailed." "No blackmail," I said clearly. "Just the truth, about Lexi's pattern of fraud, about your role in covering up her previous cases, about everything." "I move to dismiss," Lexi's lawyer started. "Sit down," Dan suddenly spoke up. All eyes turned to him. "It's over, Lexi. I'm not perjuring myself for you." "Dan," she whirled on him, "after everything we did was illegal," he said tiredly, "and I've already given my statement to the FBI." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Lexi lunged at Dan, her carefully constructed facade shattering completely. Security rushed forward as she screamed accusations and threats. "Order!" Judge Harrison slammed his gavel, but his authority had evaporated. 2 men in suits entered the courtroom, badges visible. "Judge Harrison," one announced, "we need you to come with us. And Mrs. Bryant, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted judicial manipulation." As they led Lexi away in handcuffs, she fixed me with a venomous glare. "You think this is victory? You've destroyed everything." "No," I replied calmly. "You did that yourself. Every scheme, every lie, every betrayal, those were your choices." "Mrs. Bryant," the FBI agent interrupted, "you have the right to remain silent." "I'll never be silent," she shrieked as they escorted her out. "This family will regret this, all of you." In the sudden quiet of the courtroom, Madeline touched my arm. "You okay?" I watched through the window as they led my stepmother to a waiting car. Judge Harrison following in separate custody. "I think I finally am." "It's really over," Francesca whispered. "Almost," Raphael corrected. "We still need to clean up the mess, the legal challenges, the press, the financial tangles." "We'll handle it," I said, feeling stronger than I had in weeks. "Together." As we walked out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. But for the first time since Dad's death, I felt no fear, no uncertainty, just clarity. "Miss Cynthia," one reporter called out, "any comment on your stepmother's arrest?" I paused on the steps, my family flanking me. "Just this, the truth always comes out. No matter how long it takes, no matter who tries to bury it, justice finds a way." The autumn breeze rustled through the mansion's gardens as I unlocked the front door, letting Madeline in with her boxes. After Lexi's conviction and sentencing, 15 years for fraud and conspiracy, my half-sister had finally agreed to move back home. "Still feels strange being here," she said, setting down a box in the foyer. "Good strange, but strange. Miss Cynthia," Mauricio appeared with perfect timing. "The investigators have finished with the safe room. They found something you should see." We followed him to Dad's study, where Raphael already waited with Francesca. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. "It was hidden behind a false panel," Raphael explained. "Your mother's diary." My hands trembled as I opened it. Mom's elegant handwriting filled the pages, including a letter dated just before her death. "Read it out loud," Francesca urged softly. I cleared my throat. "My dearest Cynthia, if you're reading this, you've finally discovered the truth about our home, your inheritance, and hopefully your own strength. I created the trust not just to protect our family's wealth, but to protect you from those who would exploit it. Your father knows my wishes. The mansion isn't just a house, it's a testament to love, family, and perseverance. I built it from nothing, just as you'll need to rebuild after I'm gone. Trust your instincts, trust your true family, and most importantly, trust yourself. All my love, Mom." She knew, Madeline whispered. Somehow she knew someone like my mother would come along. A knock at the study door made us turn. Dan stood there, looking uncomfortable in casual clothes rather than his usual suit. "The FBI finished interviewing me," he said. "I've told them everything, about Lexi's previous cons, about Judge Harrison's involvement, all of it." "Why did you help her in the first place?" I asked. He sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Because I was stupid and greedy, and because she convinced me you'd never be capable of running the estate yourself." He met my eyes. "I was wrong, about everything." "Yes, you were." I stood. "The Bar Association's decision." "Disbarred, as expected. I'll be testifying against the other conspirators next week." "Good." I gestured to Mauricio. "Show him out, please." As Dan left, Raphael picked up Mom's diary. "Your mother was an incredible woman. This journal, it's full of business strategies, family history, even warnings about people like Lexi. She built an empire," Francesca added, "while everyone underestimated her, just like they underestimated you." The doorbell rang, and Mauricio returned moments later with a delivery. "The new security system, Miss Cynthia, and the contractor is here about the renovations." "Go," Madeline smiled. "Be the lady of the house. We'll help unpack my things." In the entrance hall, I found myself staring at the family portrait, Dad, Mom, me as a child. The space where Lexi's portrait had hung was now empty, waiting for a new family photo. "Miss Cynthia." The contractor waited patiently. "About the changes you wanted." "Yes," I turned to him. "We'll restore everything to its original design. My mother's design. But with some modern upgrades. And the East Wing?" He checked his notes. "Converting it to a women's shelter?" "Exactly. My mother built this house to protect her family. Now it's going to protect others too." Later that evening, we gathered in the garden, Madeline, Raphael, Francesca, even Mauricio joining us with glasses of champagne. "To new beginnings," Raphael proposed. "And old wisdom," I added, thinking of Mom's journal. "And family," Madeline raised her glass. "Real family." The setting sun painted the mansion's windows gold, just as it had when Mom first designed it. I could almost hear her voice in the evening breeze, approving of everything we'd accomplished. "You know," Francesca said, "your story's been trending online. Daughter outsmarts gold-digging stepmother. People are calling you an inspiration." "They're calling her a badass," Madeline corrected with a laugh. "I just did what Mum would have done," I said. "Protected what matters. Protected family." Speaking of protection, Raphael pulled out his phone, showing us a news alert. "Lexi's previous victims are coming forward. Looks like she'll be facing more charges." "Good." I stood, walking to the garden's edge where Mom's favorite roses still bloomed. "Let her face everything she's done. We're done living in her shadow." "To karma," Madeline raised her glass again. "To justice," Raphael added. "To family," I finished, feeling the weight of Mom's ring on my finger, Dad's watch on my wrist. The real kind. As night fell over the mansion, our home, I finally felt at peace. Not because of victory or revenge, but because I'd discovered what Mom knew all along. True strength comes from protecting what you love, and real family stands together, no matter what storms come. 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 No matter what